If you believe every cop can separate duty from heartbreak, you've never met Detective Mike Hodge. Subscribe, and let's begin. The shock. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the backroads of Fayette County into winding veins of mud and reflection. Blue lights flashed across the wet asphalt as Detective Mike Hodge leaned over the hood of his cruiser, radio pressed tight to his ear. Dispatch had just come through, abandoned vehicle, no driver in sight. Copy that, Mike answered, glancing at his watch. 7:42 p.m. routine, he told himself. Probably a drunk who ditched their car. Still, something in the tone of the call set his nerves on edge. When he arrived, the car sat alone by the tree lean, a beige Oldsmobile, headlights still glowing, driver's door open. Steam curled from the hood as if the vehicle were breathing. Mike ducked under the tape just as a young officer waved him over. Detective, ID's still inside. Purse too. Mike frowned, rain sliding down his collar. Name? The rookie hesitated, flipping open a wallet. Linda Hodge. The world went silent. The radio crackled, the wind hissed through the grass, but all Mike heard was the rush of blood behind his eyes. He took the wallet himself, fingers trembling. Linda. His wife of 17 years. The woman who kissed him goodbye that morning, saying she'd meet her sister for lunch after work. Where's the driver? He asked. No sign. Tracks lead into the woods, but they fade near the creek. Mike's voice turned iron flat. No one touches the car. I'll lead the search. Flashlights cut through the forest like spears. Mud clung to boots. Dogs barked and officers shouted directions, but Mike moved alone, his beam steady, jaw clenched. Every snapped twig echoed with possibility. What if she's hurt? What if she's calling his name? Half a mile in, he found her scarf snagged on a branch. Red silk. Torn. He tucked it carefully into his coat pocket, feeling the fabric's warmth fading like memory. By midnight, the search was suspended. The sheriff insisted Mike step back, conflict of interest, they said. But he refused. That's my wife out there, he barked. I'm not going home until she is. Morning bled into a gray dawn. Mike sat in his car outside their house, staring at the front porch, the mug still on the railing, her gardening gloves beside it. The ordinary quiet mocked him. Inside, everything was intact except the phone's answering machine blinking red. One new message. Hey, Mike. It's me. Don't wait up tonight, okay? I just need to clear my head. Her voice, steady, tired, distant. The timestamp, 6:58 p.m., just 44 minutes before the call about her abandoned car. Mike replayed it again and again, searching for a clue in her tone. Why didn't she call his cell? Why, clear my head? He drove to her office. Her coworkers said she'd left early, arguing with someone on the phone. They couldn't hear the other voice, but one remembered a phrase, "You promised me." Mike scribbled it in his notebook. Promised what? He started digging. Bank records, phone logs, credit card slips, all routine checks suddenly turned personal. Within hours, he found a new savings account under her name, opened just weeks earlier. A separate life. Then came the surveillance tape. A convenience store camera 2 miles from where her car was found showed Linda pulling in around 7:10 p.m. She wasn't alone. A man exited the passenger side, tall, wearing a baseball cap low. They argued briefly near the pump. She shoved him, climbed back into the driver's seat, and sped off. The man walked away into darkness. Mike froze the frame. The build, the walk, hauntingly familiar. He printed it out, staring until the paper trembled in his hand. Could it be someone from the department? Someone he knew? By nightfall, the forest search resumed. Officers combed the creek bed, and news vans lined the road. Mike ignored the cameras, pushing deeper into the woods until he saw something glint beneath a fallen log, the corner of a leather shoe. He shouted for backup, but as the others approached, Mike already knew the color of the sole. The small scratch on the heel she always complained about. He knelt, brushing leaves aside. There was no mistaking it, Linda's foot, half buried in the wet soil. The world narrowed to a single heartbeat. He wanted to scream, to collapse, but his detective's instincts trapped him in place. He stared at the ground, whispering her name like a prayer. When the team arrived, the sheriff pulled him back. "Mike, you can't be here for this." But Mike didn't move. His gaze locked on the ground as the sheet came down. That night, the coroner confirmed the impossible. Linda Hodge was dead, the official time of death just minutes after her voicemail. Later, alone in the dark of his study, Mike spread the evidence across his desk: the scarf, the printout of the video still, the phone logs. Everything pointed to a man she trusted. He looked closer at the photo, at the faint reflection in the car window beside her. A badge. Not hers. Mike's pulse thundered. There was only one question left, burning through the fog of grief and disbelief. Who inside his own department was meeting his wife that night? The spiral. They buried Linda Hodge 3 days later under a slate-gray sky. The autumn wind cut through the cemetery, scattering dead leaves across polished headstones. Mike stood motionless beside her coffin, his badge pinned to a black overcoat, face unreadable. Colleagues lined the row behind him, their silence heavier than any eulogy. To them, he was a man broken. To himself, he was a man hunting. When the service ended, Sheriff Dale Carver pulled him aside. "Mike, I know you want justice. But you're too close. You can't investigate your own wife's case." Mike met his eyes. "You'd say the same if it were your wife?" Carver hesitated. "That's not the point." "The hell it isn't," Mike said, turning away. That night, Mike didn't go home. He went to the station, alone. The evidence locker's fluorescent light buzzed faintly as he unlocked the drawer marked Hodge, Linda, case 87-06. Inside were her belongings: the scarf, a wedding ring stained with dirt, and a small silver locket he'd never seen before. He pried it open. Inside, a photo of her and another man. Not a stranger. Not even a civilian. Detective Ryan Cole. His partner. His friend. The realization hit like a gunshot. He sank into the chair, the room spinning. Ryan, the man who stood beside him through every case, who spent holidays with their family, who toasted Linda's birthday just 2 weeks ago. Mike's hand shook as he dialed Ryan's number. Straight to voicemail. By morning, Ryan didn't show up to work. The department assumed grief had taken its toll. He and Linda had been close, everyone knew that. But Mike wasn't buying it. He drove to Ryan's apartment, pounding on the door. No answer. The curtains were drawn, car gone. He let himself in, one benefit of knowing how every lock in town worked. The apartment was spotless, too spotless. The coffee pot was still warm, but the closet was half empty. Ryan had left in a hurry. On the desk sat a manila folder, marked for transfer. Inside were copies of Linda's case photos and something else, a note scribbled on a page torn from a legal pad. "She wanted to tell you. I told her not to. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The words blurred under Mike's tightening grip. Rage mixed with heartbreak until he couldn't tell them apart. Then, a knock at the door. "Detective Hodge?" 2 federal agents stood outside, badges raised. "We need to ask you a few questions." Mike straightened. "About what?" "Ryan Cole. He's under investigation. We believe he's been taking payments from a known trafficker, James Latner. Your wife's name surfaced during our surveillance." Mike's pulse froze. My wife had nothing to do with that. The agent held up a photo, a grainy still from a hidden camera, Linda handing an envelope to Ryan in a diner parking lot. She was working with us, the agent said quietly. Linda was our informant. The room seemed to collapse. Linda, his wife, working as a federal informant against his own partner? He barely heard the rest. The agents explained that Linda had discovered Ryan's connection to Latner's network, narcotics, money laundering, the kind of corruption that could rot an entire precinct. She'd gone to the feds quietly, providing details, names, and evidence. Her final meeting was supposed to happen the night she died. Ryan must have found out, one agent said. We think she confronted him. We just don't know what happened next. Mike clenched his jaw. I do. That night, he returned to the forest where they found her. The search tape still fluttered in the wind. He stood at the creek bed, flashlight sweeping over the mud until something caught his eye, a tire track, half buried under fresh rain. It wasn't from her Oldsmobile. Too wide. He followed it back toward the road, tracing faint impressions until they ended behind an abandoned barn. The door creaked open at his touch, revealing a space filled with tools, beer cans, and a single wooden chair in the center of the floor. Rope fibers clung to its legs. A dark stain marked the concrete below. He called it in. The sheriff's team arrived within minutes, but Mike barely heard the chatter. His gaze had fixed on the wall, a cluster of photos tacked to a board. Surveillance shots of him. Of Linda. Even their house. Ryan had been watching them. Sheriff Carver laid a hand on his shoulder. Mike, you can't go after him alone. Mike didn't answer. He walked outside, pulled his gun from its holster, and stared at the badge in his hand, the symbol of everything he thought he was. Then he pocketed it. 2 days later, an APB went out for Ryan Cole. No sightings. No leads. Until one call came in from a truck stop outside Nashville. A clerk recognized Ryan's face from the bulletin, said he'd been there that morning, looking desperate, asking if anyone had payphones nearby. Mike drove the 3 hours in silence, headlights cutting through the fog. When he arrived, the clerk handed him a receipt Ryan had left behind. On the back, scrawled in pen. He's not who you think. That night, back at the motel, Mike spread the evidence across the bedspread. The locket. The photo. The note. The receipt. Each piece told a different story, and none of them fit. If Ryan was the killer, why run now? Why leave clues? And who was he? Mike turned the locket over in his hand. Inside the hinge, barely visible, was a small engraving, to L, followed by initials, JL. James Latner. The trafficker. Linda had been closer to the case than he'd ever imagined. And if Ryan wasn't the one she'd met that night? Mike sat up straight, heart pounding. Maybe Ryan wasn't running from the murder, maybe he was running from the same man who killed her. He picked up the motel phone and dialed the sheriff. Dale, it's Mike. I know who's behind this. What are you talking about? Latner didn't just bribe Ryan. He used him. He killed Linda to keep her quiet. There was silence on the other end. Then the sheriff spoke, voice calm but cold. Mike, where exactly are you right now? Mike frowned. Why? Because, son, the sheriff exhaled heavily. Ryan Cole's body was just found outside Lexington. Gunshot to the head. And your name was written on the wall beside him. Mike froze. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled, slow, deliberate, and final. He hung up the phone, staring into the motel mirror. For the first time, he didn't recognize the man staring back. Someone was framing him. The reckoning. The sun hadn't yet risen when Mike Hodge pulled off the highway, parking his car behind an abandoned service station. The radio still whispered static, the same report he'd heard all night. Detective Ryan Cole found dead. Suspect, Detective Michael Hodge, wanted for questioning. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight the leather cracked. Every nerve screamed that this was wrong. Someone had twisted the truth, turned him into the villain of his own story. He reached for the passenger seat where a box of files sat open. Photos, transcripts, his wife's recordings, everything Linda had collected for the feds. He spread them out under the dim light, tracing the connections she'd mapped. At the center was a single name circled in red, Sheriff Dale Carver. Mike's breath caught. Carver, the man who'd told him to back off the case, who'd found Ryan's body. The one person with the authority to bury evidence before anyone else saw it. Mike whispered, "You son of a," and slammed his fist into the dashboard. He knew what he had to do. At 9:14 a.m., Mike walked into the precinct through the side door, the one he'd used for 20 years. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The wanted man had returned. He walked straight past the stairs, past the murmurs, and into Carver's office. The sheriff looked up, startled but composed. "Well," Carver said slowly, "you've got nerve showing up here." "Cut the act," Mike said, tossing the file onto his desk. "Linda was your informant too, wasn't she? You were working with Latner." Carver leaned back in his chair, eyes cold. "You've lost it, Mike. You need a lawyer." Mike slammed his palms on the desk. "Ryan's dead. My wife's dead. And every piece of evidence leads back to you. She found out you were on Latner's payroll. That's why you had her silenced." The sheriff's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then, a small, humorless laugh. "You really don't get it, do you?" Carver said. "Ryan wasn't working for Latner. He was working for me. We were trying to keep the department clean, but your wife, she couldn't keep her distance. She thought she could play hero. But she went rogue, threatened to expose us all." Mike's voice dropped to a whisper. "You killed her." Carver shook his head. "No, Mike. You did." Before Mike could react, two deputies burst in, guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them, detective." Mike froze. Carver nodded to one deputy. "Get the recorder. We'll take his statement now." But Mike wasn't done. "If I'm guilty, why cover your tracks? Why burn the barn? Why plant my name on the wall?" Carver's smirk faltered. Mike's hand moved, not for his gun, but for the small voice recorder he'd hidden in his sleeve. "That's right," he said quietly. "You just confessed on tape." Carver's eyes widened. "You think that'll hold up?" "Maybe not in court," Mike said. "But it'll hold up in the press. And with the feds already watching you." The office door burst open again. This time, it wasn't deputies, it was two federal agents, weapons raised. The same agents who told Mike about Linda's informant work. "Sheriff Dale Carver," one said, "you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and the murder of Linda Hodge." For the first time in his life, Mike saw real fear in Carver's eyes. Hours later, the station was a flurry of chaos, reporters outside, officers whispering in disbelief. Mike sat in the interrogation room, exhaustion washing over him like cold rain. An agent entered, placing a file on the table. "You were right about Carver. He used Ryan as a scapegoat, but when things got messy, he eliminated them both." Mike nodded slowly. "What happens to Latner?" "We're still tracking him. Carver's confession gave us enough to move in on his network." Mike leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Linda knew. She tried to warn me." The agent gave a sympathetic nod. "She did more than that. She left you something." He slid a cassette tape across the table, labeled in Linda's handwriting, "For Mike." That night, Mike returned home for the first time since her death. The house smelled like dust and memory. He poured a glass of bourbon, sat by her old desk, and inserted the tape into the player. Static. Then her voice. "Mike, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. I never wanted to lie to you, but I had to protect you. Carver was dirty, and Ryan got in too deep. I tried to pull him out, but it was too late. Just remember, none of this was your fault. You always said the truth finds its way. I hope it does." Her voice cracked on the last line. Mike sat there in silence, tears cutting tracks down his face. For the first time in weeks, he let himself break. Outside, the night was still. He reached for his badge, tarnished, dented, and placed it on her photograph. "You were right, Linda," he whispered. "The truth always finds its way." He looked out the window toward the horizon where the first light of dawn crept over Kentucky hills. Somewhere out there, Latner was still free, but not for long. Mike rose, holstering his gun, determination sharpening his grief into purpose. The war wasn't over, it was only changing hands. He stepped outside, the early light washing over his face as if cleansing him of the past. And in the faint whisper of wind that moved through the trees, he almost swore he heard her voice again, "Finish it, Mike." He smiled faintly. "I will. If you think this story was intense, wait till you hear the next one. Subscribe so you don't miss it.